Our speaker is one busy guy today. It is Tom Neilson, who combines art with activism. He's been performing, he says, since the age of 3, and has received over 24 awards, including 2 Songs of the Year awards from independent musicians. He was awarded 2 CDs of the Year from Just Plain Folks International. In 2017, he received the Arab American Women's Association Award for Human Rights Work in Palestine. Michael Shack of Miami's WLRN station says, Tom does a great job of reminding people what is really important and the power of folk music to say it. Tom will tell you that he's just a farm boy with a guitar who likes a good ball game, but and human rights also, and he is a member of the American Federation of Musicians Local 1000 and lives in Greenfield, Massachusetts. So please welcome him as a speaker today.
Thank you for the poem you did, Sharon. That's one of my favorites, and I've thought of that often with my forks. I really love the first song that I did today, the one about Sarah Tukowski, the John McCutcheon song. The first time I heard John do it, it resonated me as a ball player and as a coach. My freshman year in college, I went out for baseball. First day of practice, I was told, when you go into second base, show him your cleats, because if he can't play, take him out, because if he can't play, he can't beat you. And I couldn't do that. I've never intentionally hurt anyone as a coach. If any of my players ever did that, they sat. Some parents would tell me it's part of the game. And, you know, that's what they do. That's what we do. And I said, well, not in my ballpark, not in my league, we don't. But the metaphor isn't lost in everyday choices that we make. You know, I will try and get my range down here. A 20th century philosopher, who I'm sure most all of you know, said, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. Now, what people don't know is that where Yogi lived, it was on a circle. So you could take that straight road and get to it, and you could go left or right and get to his house. So when you see you come to a fork, you take it. But like Yogi, we've all taken those forks, like in a road not taken. 1,000 different lives we might have had if we had gone left or right, if we had taken more traveled, less traveled. For fortune, fame, power, love, adventure. I was born on a little dairy farm, upstate New York. Like many other farms, we were 3-generational. Ours we were 120 acres. We had cows, pigs, chickens, ducks, fruit trees, a good-sized garden. Most everyone hunted to put food on the table. And we all tried to be as self-sufficient as we were able to be. The Sand Hill Methodist Church was where I did that first performance at the age of 3. It was composed of all those farm families. We had an outhouse out back. We heated with a wood stove. And it had no indoor plumbing. And it was always much more of a community gathering for me growing up. That's how I saw it. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe said, it's not doing the thing we like to do, but liking the thing we have to do. And man, I had to sing, and I had to play ball, and as I grew older, I realized I had to travel, and we'll get into some of that. Now, my mom taught me performance art, why segregation was criminal, show up when you say you're going to, and that the audience is my friend. She directed church and community choirs, was church organist into her 90s, and taught me when I was quite young that all wars are stupid, especially, and the most stupidest wars were over religion. She made it very clear to me when I was 7 years old and came home and told her that my empirical research indicated that redheads were the smartest people in the world. And she said that my sample was a bit small. And that was me and my mom. But she planted a lot of seeds that contributed to my choosing the forks that I chose. But the first fork I had to choose was to rid myself of the acculturation of fear. It required that I think for myself and get out from under my desk where I was hiding from the bogey communists. Now, how many people here hid under their desks when they were 5, 6 years old? And the imprinting that does to all of us. It required that I separate from conformist thought, a phenomenon that plagues us here in the United States. Dr. Martin Luther King said, fear gets in the way of thinking rationally. It gets in the way of right action. Remember how our teachers and parents and authorities used to tell us to think for ourselves all the time, and ultimately what that meant was do as you're told. No difference today. Conformist thought is ingrained. When we're told to be afraid, we're supposed to be afraid. It's obedience to authority. It's thought control. It becomes normal, and it's against the law to disobey that, and I certainly have tried my whole life not to be normal. You know, like when the Catholic worker community, you might remember when they had the mock air raid drills in New York City, they refused to go underground, and they were arrested for endangering the lives of others. And I couldn't figure that out. They're up on the street, and the others are down in the bunker. How were they endangering their lives? But their real crime was disobedience to authority, and that was not okay. But that's common. That's common. Blaming is a common tactic to use by people in authority. It's a tactic used to scapegoat when people are disobedient to that authority. Dylan sang about it. He said, I will not go down under the ground, because someone is saying that death's coming round. Alexis de Tocqueville wrote in 1831 that there was much he admired about the United States. But he wrote of the tyranny of the majority and the importance of taking sides as a matter of identity. This is one of the social transformations addressed by David Reisman in The Lonely Crowd. What he describes as the collective neuroses from the need to conform. Snell and Putney write that the need to conform is so strong that people will create a self-image that's actually counter to whom they really are, just to be included. Hence Reisman's neuroses from the fear of exclusion, not wanting to be an outlier. In his sermon, The Mastery of Fear, Dr. King says there's probably no emotion that plagues and crumbles the human personality more than fear. From the Birmingham jail, he wrote that it was necessary to break these paralyzing shackles of conformity, saying that fear gets in the way of everything right we want to do. Now, the passage to manhood where I grew up was through the sawmill and also through the military. It was just expected that that's what young men did. And I decided my sophomore year in college that that was one shackle I was going to break. I wasn't quite sure how, but I felt I had more in common with Vietnamese farmers than I did with the Wall Street brokers who wanted to pay me to go kill them. And after graduation, 2 years later, I pursued the vocation of draft dodger. Now, some people told me to enlist in the Navy, that it was the lesser of evils, but others told me to let them draft me, then get in the National Army Choir, or that I was smart and I would get a desk job. But I said, no, it's all part of the same system, and I cannot support that. As Argentine folk musician Leon Gieco wrote in exile, "Solo le pido a Dios que no me sea indiferente." All I ask is that I not be indifferent to war, to injustice, to suffering. The opposite of good, said Rabbi Abraham Heschel, is not evil. The opposite of good is not bad. It's indifference. So it was the summer of 1969, and in the spirit of not being indifferent, I confronted some white guys who were using disparaging slurs based on the pigment in one's skin. And looking back, I can see that I perhaps came across as a bit abrupt and perceived as confrontational. And my head felt, you know, when Wile E. Coyote would run into the wall and he would break into a bunch of jigsaw pieces, and that's what my head felt like. And the blood started coming down over my glasses. And it was, if not the beginning of wisdom, it did teach me something about the violence of white supremacy. So I got home that night, and my mom always waited up. She said, when you're a parent, you'll understand. And it was about 11:30, and I walked in. I didn't know that my beard had all this dried blood in it, you know. And she comes up to me. My mom is about 5 feet tall. She got right up in my face. She said, "What happened?" And I thought, how did she know that something happened? And I told her, and she said, "I'm proud of you. Now go wash your face and go to bed." And, you know, that validation, she could have freaked out. She could have been frightened. She could have been angry, all as a response to her fear of my safety in that. But my safety and getting my head cut open was secondary to the fact that I stood up for someone's human rights. And when we take those forks, sometimes all we need is one person to validate, and that's all I needed. And I look back sometimes and think, had she responded a different way, but her validation was so strong and so powerful. I wouldn't do it the same way next time probably, but I was ready to go out there again. Sometimes we just need that one person, and sometimes we are that one person who stands up for someone else. But upon graduation in '70, I decided to leave the country, go to South America, and 2 weeks after leaving the country, Dr. Salvador Allende was elected president of Chile. And I knew that when I finished my job in Colombia, I was on my way to the Tropic of Capricorn. Now, Che Guevara said, at the risk of sounding ridiculous, the real revolutionary must be guided by feelings of love. And I found that to be true, with love in its many dimensions. So in 1973, as I was packing for the Tropic of Capricorn to visit a friend in Santiago, who was there also because of Allende, the coup came. At that time in Chile, some of you may remember, Anaconda Copper and the CIA, Henry Kissinger, were all putting the squeeze on that country. My work extended just a bit in Colombia, so I wasn't there when the coup went down. And I lost contact with her, and I could not locate her. As he orchestrated that coup, Kissinger and the CIA were responsible for thousands arrested, tortured, disappeared, and a future I was anticipating suddenly was disappeared as well. Sometimes the fork we take abruptly ends, says Joseph Campbell. We must be willing to let go of the life we have planned so as to live the life that's waiting for us. Chris Hedges writes about the American psychosis, modern-day consumerism, totalitarian corporate power, and living in a culture dominated by pervasive illusion. Returning to the U.S. in '74, I felt like a foreigner here in the midst of this illusion, with a media that was filled with information about places where I had been. The illusion is perpetuated by what Orwell calls political speak, language designed to make lies sound truthful and murder respectable. Che also said that the first duty of a revolutionary is to be educated, and this means sifting through this language, such as in 1947 with the formation of the National Security State, the War Department was changed to the Defense Department because they knew people would not pay billions of dollars for war, but they would pay $1 trillion if they thought they were being defended. And other examples of that, and we all know them. National security is fossil fuel extraction. Humanitarian intervention, invasion and occupation. Extraordinary rendition is kidnapping. We need to study these, folks. Enhanced interrogation is torture, that's right. Lethal action is assassination, and on and on. A bioweapon lab is called a biosafety lab. In 1973, while in Colombia, it was pointed out to me that by living outside the States, I wasn't supporting the Vietnam War. And I said, how is that? And they said, well, you're not paying taxes. And I had never thought of it that way. And that became a modus operandi for me at that point as another reason, although I was really enjoying living outside the States, this made living outside the States even more practical and more important for me. So I left. I went to West Africa for 3 years. I worked in Europe for a year. I was back to North Africa a couple times. I was in East Africa. I got to East Africa in 1981. That was the same year that William Casey said, we'll know our misinformation program is a success when everything the U.S. public believes is false. Now, this isn't the first time. We can go back to John Foster Dulles. It was the same policy. He said, if you want a war, you get your good guy, your hero, which is the United States, and then you demonize some country where we want something to where people in this country will sacrifice and pay for that war. And that's exactly what we do. And now today we have, and perhaps some of you have heard about these, Matt Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger, Alex Gutentag have released the CTIL files. They started releasing those in November, and this is all about how information is created and how censorship is determined by the government. Look to Matt Taibbi if you haven't heard about these files, because they're very important what are being released. Durrell writes in Justine, we are all hunting for rational reasons for believing in the absurd, and Voltaire told us when you can get people to believe in absurdities, they can be persuaded to commit atrocities. In 1850, French economist Frédéric Bastiat wrote that when plunder becomes a way of life for a group of people, they create for themselves in the course of time a legal system that authorizes it and a moral system that glorifies it. And it becomes a crime to tell the truth. And when people who expose criminal activity are then accused of committing a crime, we're being governed by criminals. Ellsberg, Assange, Snowden, Drake, Rowley, Kiriakou, Manning, Sterling, all branded as liars and traitors for telling the truth. As Bob Dylan says, to live outside the law, one must be honest. Now, in Somalia with the United Nations in 1983, I received a cable from Geneva reprimanding me for not sending a report. I went to my superior, who I had given the report to, and he said he didn't send it. Why didn't he send it? He said, because you told the truth. He said, Geneva doesn't want to hear the truth. They would have been upset with you, and you would never have had a career with the UN. I was ultimately moved from the northwest border, put behind a desk for my last 2 months in Khamar. Still, at the end of my contract, the head of HCR wanted me to re-up for another 2 years. And that was a real break because this was the life I wanted, working and living in other countries. But that fork put me as an enabler. I felt like I was a cog in that wheel of imperialism, and I could not do that any longer. At Riverside Church in '67, Dr. King said, the U.S. is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. A time comes when silence is betrayal. And in 1940, when Pablo Casals was in exile in France, wrote that the artist is obligated to speak out for social justice because we have a medium that will be listened to when others are not. And that sounded right to me. And yes, there's pushback. because truth holds up a mirror. I've been told by many peers that they won't write anything controversial because they want to be liked by everyone. Well, they say it's easier to get work, and I won't disagree with that. But I can't imagine being liked by everyone. I just need a few people to have a catch with now and then. That would be all right. But I have been regularly censored and for decades labeled as unpatriotic, disrespectful, controversial, offensive, inappropriate, edgy, a communist, of course, as if that were bad, an eco-terrorist, and my favorite, that I take justice too far. Industry people have told me I need to write more love songs. And I responded that, well, I really love my songs. And one music promoter said, you need to write feel-good songs. And I said, well, I feel really good about them. And he said, you name names. You can't name names. Well, how will people know who I'm talking about? And he says, and he got a little exasperated. He says, look, you're not going to get bookings if you offend your audience. And I thought, well, there's always Unitarians. Martha Beck writes that art is ultimately about telling the truth. If there are people who don't like the truth, you have to decide whether you want to do your art or whether you want to do small talk. Because if you get away from the truth to please other people who want you to not tell your truth, you've lost the artist in you. And I suggest that here we are all artists in our own way. And maintaining the artist in us may be the most important fork that we can take. In 85 and 86, I was working in Nicaragua as an interpreter and a pair of hands building a school during the Contra War. We were attacked twice by Contras. And returning to the States, I was told by news media that I contacted that it didn't happen. And it didn't happen because the U.S. it wasn't on the AP line or UPI, and back then we had the three networks, the Washington Post, New York Times. But they didn't come to the Managua press conference when international press did. And so it didn't happen. And it didn't get reported until more people from this construction brigade came back. The Boston Globe ran one piece on it, and then it was gone. In '72, I was hitchhiking in Nicaragua and was picked up by Sandinistas before we really knew about Sandinistas. And they told me my real work was here in the United States. They said it was great that I was getting all this experience and learning about the region and the history, but he said, when we overthrow Somoza, which they did 7 years later, the U.S. will call us all communists and they will attack us, and my job, they said, was to go back and tell the truth about what is happening, which I didn't want that to be my job, because my job was to travel and have all these experiences, and that's exactly what the U.S. did, of course. It was a horrid war. In '88, another revolutionary army. I had been invited through my connections when I worked in East Africa by the Eritrean People's Liberation Front to go to join them in their war for independence. And they said the same thing. Because I said, I will stay here and help you in any way that I can. I can teach, because everything was underground. Everything was camouflaged. This was the longest war. You never heard anything about it. It went on for 30 years. And they said the same thing. My job was to go back to the States and tell people the truth about what is happening in East Africa. I didn't want to hear that then either, because that wasn't in my plan. But they said, if you want to do some work for us, you need to look to see how you are most powerful and where you have your voice and who will listen to you, and take what you have learned to that place. A Somali proverb says, when you learn a foreign language, you become another person. And I wanted to keep becoming those persons. Malcolm said in '63, to understand Mississippi, you must understand Lumumba and the Congo. And my travels have taught me similarly that to understand Standing Rock, I have to also understand U.S. sanctions against 42 countries 800 military bases, and endless violence against Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, and it's a long list. The forest was shrinking, but the trees kept voting for the axe because its handle was made of wood, and they thought it was one of them. We are in a new year of forks in the road, and let us be prepared, as Yogi says, to take them, and not be intimidated, afraid, or persuaded by notions of lesser evil, or conforming to be with some group as part of our identity. Let us follow our beliefs, follow our conscience, and not opt for the easy way out. Because in the end, said Dr. King, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. What's right and good doesn't necessarily come naturally or easy. We have to stand up and fight for it as if the cause depends on us. Because it does. Thank you.